future thinking can be practiced every day with a small mental fitness exercise to stretch your mind and help you envision the future. There are two fun exercises you can do. One is called predict the past, and the other remember the future. So predicting the past is about remembering a fact from a long time ago, but then you will change perspective on it. We call it counterfactual memory.
Welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. I'm your host Akanksha Kulkarni, and let's begin with a quick introduction of peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and video challenge, which receives upwards of 200,000 visitors a year, and publish around 2 interviews with well-known names globally every month. And now for our guest, Sylvia Gallusser is the founder and CEO of Transhumanism. Sylvia has been advising 500 plus tech companies for the past 15 years. Sylvia is an inquirer of our future, conducting prospective studies on the future of health and aging, the future of work and learning, as well as transformations in transportation, mobility, and in retail world. We are extremely happy to have her with us today. Welcome, Sylvia. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I love your series of talk, and I have found many wonderful resources myself in your library of podcasts. So thank you for having me.
That's our pleasure. Thank you so much. So, Sylvia, let's start with the interview. And the first question that I would like to ask you is, can you tell us something about your journey to Transhumanism, and also, your new book that you've published, Aftershocks and Opportunities: Scenarios for a Post-Pandemic Future?
Sure. Thank you for the introduction. Very kind. So a few words about myself. So after graduating in social science and business, I have actually been a strategy consultant for the past 15 years. I started working for telecommunication companies, first with Accenture, and then I supported French technology companies in their US business development as part of different international trade organizations called Business France, French Tech. And also through a startup I actually co-founded called Big Bang Factory. So as you were saying, during that time, I advised probably more than 500 companies on their strategy for the US market. Mm-hmm. And among these solutions, there were like healthcare solutions, educational tools, enterprise software, industrial management systems, productivity tool, and employee engagement platforms. But a few years back, I decided to add the futurist layer to my consulting practice and extend the horizon of my strategic analysis. I actually wanted to work with companies with long-term reach and social impact. And therefore, I enrich my offer with future studies and strategic foresight. I will tell you more about it. So today, my research at Transhumanism focuses on the social and ultimately human aspect of our future. So we focus on the future of health and well-aging, as well as the future of work and also lifelong learning. On a side note, I have always been a heavy writer. I love to write both fiction and non-fiction. And future fiction, I found, is a particularly relevant tool to bring people to put themselves in the shoes of their future self. So it was just too tempting to join the current effort of envisioning our post-pandemic world along with a fellow futurist. And I actually had the chance to come across an amazing team at Fast Future. And I became part of the Aftershocks and Opportunities project. In that book, revolves around a history class taking place 70 years from now. And a classroom of high schoolers is studying the COVID crisis with their teacher. And they review the 2-year sequence of events that follows the sanitary crisis. So in this story, I envision macro trends, economic macro trends, the rushed reopening of the economy, of business, the confusing time also for medical research and a delayed vaccine. Then a second strain of virus arrives, and there's a comeback of the pandemic. I don't want to spoil it all, but just to give you an idea. I also talk about segregation policies by health status, which was a really interesting topic to dive in. And I also mentioned military intervention to calm down protests, and that was 3 years ago that I wrote it, so it really resonates today. But beyond the medical, economic, and social impact of the pandemic, I also wanted to explore what it means to teach history, and especially how we are going to teach history to the children born today in these times of crisis. And I have specific questions around this, like how do we convey our experience of this period to the next generation? And more largely, how can we help this generation, Generation Alpha, to reflect on their roots and to define their identity in this new world and this new paradigm? And finally, I evoke also the more intimate experience of the crisis, the inner wounds, the impossible grief. And I illustrate this probably more in the subtext through the personal story of the teacher who has lost someone dear in the crisis. And there we have another line of questioning, like how are individuals going to grieve for the family and friends they lost, and how can we make sure that these individuals find a space to grieve the loved ones they lost in anonymity. Well, all these questions finally converge towards what is one of my main concerns relating to this crisis. How do we profoundly heal as a society in this large-scale death count, and how can we help people to heal and recover from the profound wound the crisis left?
That's an interesting book. I am pretty sure I am going to read it afterwards, after our interview, definitely. So that was a really wonderful journey that you've had. So the next question that I would like to ask you, Sylvia, is what does it mean to monitor the future of the mind, and why do you believe in transhumanism?
Nice question. I wouldn't say exactly I believe in transhumanism, but I am definitely curious about its development. With the very question, like how technology can improve, augment, and even transform the human body, the human mind, and therefore the humankind. So first of all, there is a very blurry boundary between human treatment and human enhancement. We have entered a field where medical and technological achievements can both serve the persons in need, but also increase capacities of others. Just to give you an example, we have found remedies for blind people to recover eyesight, which is amazing. But the same research also enables to beam images from one person's mind into another. See, that's vertiginous. Second, the field of what is acceptable also evolves over time. Some medical advancements, which were taboos yesterday, they become mainstream. Just once again, to give you a few illustrations: transfusion, vaccination, antibiotics, birth control, IVF, gender reassignment surgery. So all this evolve over time. So what about human cloning, or downloading our mind in digital formats, or controlling an exoskeleton or a second body from our mind? So the transhumanist effort asks questions about our sense of identity and our consciousness and the potentiality of an eternal life as well. So yeah, it really feels vertiginous to me, but these questions are definitely worth asking, so I believe. And finally, we need to create an ethical framework to handle these topics. There's been active debating around what is progress and what represents a danger for humankind. I have a book I love, which is called More Than Human by Ramez Nam, and it illustrates how gene therapy, so this is a technique based on gene alteration and reinsertion via virus. So gene therapy was risky at first, but it saved the life of a 4-year-old girl, and since then it has really developed. It was the first test by the time, but today gene therapy is popular, and it helps combat and even cure diseases. And for example, gene therapy is used to treat anemia or in HIV therapy. But gene therapy is also known to boost human athletic performance. So it can once again be used in different contexts, and that's what we want to care for. So to handle these topics, you were asking how I do monitor the future of the mind. And so I think to stop past evolutions, identify long-term trends, and finally make informed decisions. But unfortunately, we often think in the short term, and we find it hard to project ourselves like years from now. This is actually a characteristic of our brain. Like we tend to have a threshold, like around 5 years, where it's very difficult for us to think beyond, because our future self kind of becomes estranged to us. It's all in our brain, like it's how we are wired. And we are unable to empathize with this stranger who will become in 5 years. However, professional futurists, they are trained for stretching that horizon through foresight. They scan for signals for the future, they create scenarios, sometimes fiction or artifacts from the future, and all this is designed to instigate the concrete feeling of the future, of what the future could be like. So this type of strategic foresight helps people and organizations, companies, governments, decision makers, or even individuals to think about possible futures and prepare for them. So that's an important part of it. So in terms of how I do monitor the future of the mind, well, I apply this methodology of professional futurists, which consists in activating my radar, listen to events happening today in a restrained environment, and to imagine if they were amplified in the future and if they became more common. What would happen if they extend to a more general audience? And I am also very fond of a book of Michio Kaku, which is really a reference to me, which is called The Future of the Mind. And I also love Yuval Noah Harari book, Sapiens. And I think they are both great sources of insights on our past evolution as humans. For example, Michio Kaku replaces Homo sapiens in the realm of conscious being, from plants with no brain structure and simple environment feedback loops, to reptiles who have a brain stem and additional like space parameter, then mammals, they have a limbic system and they have more social parameters, and finally humans with their prefrontal cortex and a more complex representation of the world, which includes time, a sense of history and of the future. So when I read them, I just cannot help thinking about the future of our species, and which I think is a fascinating question, right?
It's a really interesting take on, thinking about the future and applying it to the organization. I really loved it actually. And I hope that I'm going to listen about that more in our further interview itself. So moving on to our next question that I would like to ask you is, for some startups, scaling up to a large enterprise takes place in a very short span. So what are some key aspects of these startups to consider or be cautious about with respect to their growth strategy? What do you think?
Well, very, very good question. So if you want your business to flourish, you need room to grow. So you need to invest in people, in technology, in a workplace, physical or connected, in training. So I would say the first challenge is often linked to administrative burden. So time management is essential during this phase of rapid growth. And leaders, they need to focus on product development and on business development. So they don't always have the time to do proper HR management. So they either underestimate the role of HR or they rely on simplified outsourced HR. Startup CEOs, they also need to run a safe and compliant business. And this starts from day one, even when you have just one employee. So this includes like, how do you run a payroll? Do you file taxes? How do you onboard new hires? Sometimes how do you apply for visas? But as they grow fast, turnkey solutions are not enough anymore. So workplace regulations evolve and scale-ups will require like real HR to establish and document new processes. And that's what I would focus on. It's not just about having the right tool. It's also about putting in place the right processes. For example, there has been in Europe a lot around GDPR, like the General Data Protection Regulation, and even startup had to comply. So they needed to put in place processes very early in the process to make sure that they were compliant.
Yeah.
So yeah, at this point, once again, I think it's not just the tools, but it's processes that are important. Also, another frequently mentioned challenge is about recruitment. Like the recruitment process, which goes from defining your employer brand, defining the employee value proposition, and also candidate acquisition and onboarding. But in addition to that, people analytics have become something that you cannot avoid. Like analyzing your employees and your applicants' data can really inform better decisions. And it can lead you to make more strategic actions. So you need to start collecting this people data early on and to be aware to scan for signals inside your own environment. And another topic is online brand reputation. It must be checked today on websites like Glassdoor, and it needs to be worked on if necessary. If your reputation is hurt, it is so hard to fix. So you need to care for it from the start. And onboarding is key. During the scale-up phase, so this acceleration phase, leaders are working so much, they tend to just sit down new hires. They will forego formalities and put them directly straight to work. But this tends to lead to poor performance and low retention rates. So leaders need to take the time to train employees, new hires, and to introduce them to the corporate culture. And I would say that the third challenge, like corporate culture and managing the cultural change. Because as the company grows, the role of the founding team must change from entrepreneur to really leader of people. So they must accept CEOs and co-founders to relinquish control over part of the operations. But too often, founders want to retain a huge amount of influence across all areas of business, and they want to continue to make key people decisions. But they have to accept that HR has a role to play. And that's for their own good, so they can spend more time on growing the business and leading by example. So it's important to remember that the company culture does not only belong to the founders, it really belongs to the people they hire. Mm-hmm. And maybe if I have 1 more minute, I would add another specificity of growth strategy and business acceleration. Growth drivers consist in finding the right product market fit, and then they will implement the right go-to-market strategy. That's usually where you can see if the company is on the right track. These indicators will notably bring investors on board and further develop the business. But there's something new. Now VC funds, like Andreessen Horowitz, for example, are expecting the companies to reach what they call the product zeitgeist fit, which I find is a really interesting concept. It means products need to fit perfectly with the spirit of our times. And to give you an example from these days, you can think of face masks during COVID, for example, and how smart companies pivoted to adapt to this very specific times we're living. And I like to go even further by pushing the companies I work with to find their product preferred future fit, which is adapting the product to their preferred future, the one they want to build. It means not only think in the 3-year profitability, but or the next round of funding, but really to engage in an even more sustainable vision with an horizon like closer to 10 years. Mm-hmm. So I really think we are going in that direction, and that's why I actually engage in future studies.
Great. So basically, we have to be people-centric, we have to be future-centric as well. If you balance both of it, I guess.
Thank you. That's what I believe.
That is really amazing answer, Sylvia. What I would like to ask you next is, what would be your advice to the upcoming graduate class that is going to face this adversity in terms of job opportunities due to the COVID crisis?
Well, so we don't have the full picture yet, but things are changing. Like work is changing, organizations are changing, employee behaviors are changing, and the workplace is changing. Some talk about transformation, others about an acceleration of what was already there, what was already taking place. What is important to notice with the impact of COVID on the work environment is that it's not just work which is redesigned, but business. And this varies by industry. It's not like there's not just one future of work, it's like future of different works. It varies by industries. Some industries will be transformed, like air travel. Imagine air travel. New processes include less human interaction in the airport, more electronic check-in and controls, hygiene and safety measures, health monitoring, spacing in the aircraft, and so on. Or if you think of teachers, they will spend more time cleaning supplies, or maybe class supplies won't be shared anymore. There will be also spacing in the classroom. The size of the class will be reduced. Social interactions will be less tactile. So the role of the teachers will evolve consequently. Because business evolves, work evolves. Live entertainment, they will have to deal with the fact that customers are now used to more free online entertainment. So we expect business models to change in the live entertainment industry. Hospitals will be transformed, supply chain as well. So I would say work is changing at two levels. It changes because of new regulations and new customer behaviors. Industries are transformed and new processes apply, new roles are defined, so work is changing. And then there's the second level. Work is changing because employees themselves as individuals have changed and have been transformed during the crisis. So they won't have the same expectations tomorrow. Essential workers, they have been largely exposed, and they will ask for more safety, more recognition, more job security, higher salary. So it will change their behaviors. White collars, they had the opportunity to work from home, to suppress commute, but for some others it also meant going into furlough, unemployment, or to start gigs. So they have developed new work habits. Remote teams, they have learned new ways to work together. And communication, of course, has changed nature. Probably distance, connected, but maybe also more personal, because now we can see actually our boss's home interiors. So it's also distant, but also more personal. So communication is definitely changing. And all this has consequences on work schedules. The traditional 9-to-5 format is evolving, not only because employees had to adapt and rebalance their work life around more family time, but they have also gotten used to less commutes. And tomorrow, we want to avoid workers going to work at the same time and using public transportation massively at the same time. So probably the traditional 9-to-5 format is going to explode as well. And the workplace of tomorrow is affected by the change. Some giant tech companies in Silicon Valley are prolonging the closure for an undetermined time. Facebook, Twitter, Square. Others have already adapted the workplace to safety needs and regulation, and they will further remodel their floors. So things are shifting, and we really think, actually, in the futurist community, that office centricity is over. Yeah. There's also a concept rising, which I think illustrates this. It's a concept of work net, meaning like you work in a net of context. Stephanie Akawius mentioned this in a very nice session from the Recovery Summit, and she explains how the work net is a network of context instead of a fixed workplace. And in this new work net, social interactions become more important than ever, so we need to investigate and to invest in them. So what would be, you're asking, what would be my advice for the upcoming graduates, given all this new context, how to prepare them for the new job market and the new workplace? And I have to say, this is an ongoing question, like we already had it for the past decade, even if the terms were not exactly the same. But it's been like, how do we prepare the new generation of workers for a future of work which is more automated, with artificial intelligence playing a bigger role? And the answer revolved around which are the skills that workers need to develop to adapt to new jobs. I have written a paper on this called Rise of the Machines and the Future of Work in 4 big ideas. And I think I was reading it again. I think it still works today. The reasoning is not that different. First of all, we cannot be in denial. Like, a huge amount of jobs will be destroyed. I've seen the stat yesterday. It's been estimated at least 50 million jobs. But other jobs will be created, and that's the good news. The second step is, okay, these new jobs, they require new skill sets, and companies need to identify very quickly what these new mandatory skills are. And finally, going backward from these new jobs and these new skills, the question is, how can we prepare individuals from their young age? And how can education institutions include these new skills in their curriculum? And I also believe in lifelong learning as a solution. You don't learn everything at school. You learn all your life long through education you receive from your parents, your school, your social environment, the companies you work in training and on the job, your readings, listening to this type of online podcasts or classes. So staying in tune and listening attentively to signals of change is once again a strength that can help. So I am sure we can help graduates develop their future thinking and their foresight skills in order to stay in touch with the moving world, what we call the VUCA environment. So they need flexibility, they need adaptation skills, they need to challenge the existing. And I really think institutions can help by including more future studies in their program.
Great. So there needs to be some kind of characteristics that needs to be developed by them as well, right? The learning ability, the adaptability. So to be able to move forward,
Yeah.
to be able to move forward and be there in the future as well. So I guess those are really going to help. So Sylvia, thank you so much for that answer. And lastly, to wrap up this interview, I would like to ask you, do you have any important sound bites that you would like to leave our audience with?
Yeah, sure. Maybe a last message. And once again, I'm going to talk about my passion, like futurism. But as futurists like to quote William Gibson, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So futurists are more and more in demand in this changing world, in this changing paradigm. But you don't need to be a professional futurist to develop this mindset. And I want to give just a few advice on how you can do it on your own. So future thinking can be practiced every day with a small mental fitness exercise to stretch your mind and help you envision the future. There are two fun exercises you can do. One is called Predict the Past, and the other, Remember the Future. So predicting the past is about remembering a fact from a long time ago, but then you will change perspective on it. We call it counterfactual memory. So you will think of the perspective of someone you interacted in during this event, and you will try to see this other person's perspective. Mm-hmm. The second one, Remembering the Future, is more about imagining a what-if situation, but really like envisioning as if you were living it. So you will call on your senses and try to live it with all your full senses. Also, hard empathy is a necessary skill to adopt a futurist mindset. It's the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to vary perspectives. And future thinking is a first-person exercise. It's like, what would I do if I had this role? It's not an unbiased thing. It's really you have to put yourself into imagining what if it were you in this future context. Another good exercise I like, which is challenging but really fun to do with a group of people, it's called 100 Ways Things Could Be Different. You take an example like how would be the birthday different, like do we need to have cake, do we need to have presents, and so on. So think about 100 ways, one event, one moment in life, one social situation could be different. And this really helps you and stick your mind. Then, of course, start collecting signals of the future, search for signals of change in your specific industry, in where you have passion. Read about new research, new products, listen to voices from the field. There are tons of podcasts today. You can listen from a teacher in one country, you can listen from a social worker, and so on. So observe behaviors around you. Talk with people, talk to them. So you will gain valuable insight, because future thinking is also collaborative work. So be part of communities in your field of interest. Try to gain collective foresight. And finally, and probably that's the most important message, but be part of that change. The future of work, for example, is not fully here today. You can contribute to build it. So it's not like being fatalist or passive. You are part of the change. And future thinking is really about that, what we call urgent optimism, a term coined by Jane McGonigal. So it's about engaging into action. And I think you can do it starting from now.
That's really amazing. I guess we are definitely going to try the exercises that you mentioned, and we're going to try it because we have been in the lockdown, quarantined, and I guess our brains really need that kind of exercise, right? So
Yes.
yeah, so we look forward to that, and it was a pleasure talking to you, Sylvia, and I really appreciate your time and your views that you shared with us. It's really been an enriching experience for me, and I'm sure it would be for our audience as well. Uh,
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, and let's keep in touch and have a safe and healthy life ahead of you. And thank you so much for that.
Thank you again. That was a pleasure. And thank you again.
Thank you.